Hello again, everyone. For those of you that are just joining us, welcome to Alerting, Visualizations, and Dashboarding for Kubernetes. Our host today is Roy Norell. Just some housekeeping items before we get started. We'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to ask them in the chat room throughout the presentation. I'll be monitoring that and writing down all your interesting questions, as usual. Additionally, we'll be sending out the recording by the end of the week. So without further ado, hi, Roy, and thanks so much for hosting this content for us today.
Hey, Gwen, thanks for the introduction, and I'm happy to be here with all of you that joined us today, and to the ones that are going to listen to this webinar once it's recorded. I'll be happy to share with you kind of a high level of what are the challenges, market trends, and how we see Kubernetes getting into the market. Gwen, let me know if you can see my screen.
Looks great, Roy.
Okay, perfect. So quick introduction about me. I joined Logz.io a month and a half ago. I'm in the product management for over 13 years, building and developing solutions for development, DevOps teams, and focus on SaaS products. And I'm excited to be part of the Logz.io team. And I was asked to come and talk a little bit about containers, Kubernetes, and what does it mean for us as a users. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about market trends. It's going to be, this webinar is going to be more on the higher level side of the topic. We're going to talk about the market trends, what we see overall, which I think is very interesting. There are a lot of changes that happens in the market. We will talk about what are the challenges to monitor and understand what's going on in our Kubernetes environment. We will discuss best practices, and then we have a very exciting demo that I'm looking forward to share with you. And after that, we will talk about Q&A. I guess that we're gonna finish in around 25-30 minutes. So that's more or less ballpark the plan. So let's start. Now, if we were looking at the market trends, there are a few trends that I think influence dramatically the way that we should look at the Kubernetes and how we should monitor them. The first one is obviously the massive cloud adoption that we see across our customers and obviously in the market, which is, it really helped teams to move way faster. We will talk about that in a second. What you can see here, that 94%.
Hey, Roy, I'm going to have to cut you off for just one quick second. Could you hit present on your PowerPoint?
I did. I don't know if you see that screen, so maybe you see the other one.
Because we're just seeing.
You see?
Yeah, we're seeing the other one.
I don't know if that's. Let me try to change.
There we go. We got it.
You got it?
Yes.
Okay. Is it better now?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Roy. Sorry about that.
Thanks. So again, if we look at the cloud adoption, we're talking about 95%, 94% of the customers that we talked with. We see them adopting the cloud, which means it's all over. The other trend, which is very interesting, which is more Kubernetes related, the adoption of the Kubernetes is grown significantly even from last year. And today, us internally, most of our environments are developed using Kubernetes. When we're talking with customers, since I joined, I talked with many customers. All of them are using Kubernetes as part of their development solution, as part of their deployment operation. And this is something that it's a very, very clear to us that this is being adopted by almost all of our customers. Another trend which is related also to the way that we look at solutions is the fact that most of the market, most of the users adopt their solution across multiple cloud vendors, which is, if you look here, you can see that most of the users or most of the people addressed this or answered this survey have been using more than one cloud vendor. And this is pretty interesting, and we see the trend growing that more and more teams are moving from on-premises to a cloud solution, multiple cloud vendors, in order to optimize cost, in order to cover multiple geographies. There are many reasons why teams are adopting multiple cloud solutions. The last one that I want to cover and talk about today is overall the DevOps trend, and I assume without really knowing that most of the people that attend this webinar are either part of a DevOps team or developers. We may have a few people that are more operational ops guys, and overall what we see that the development teams are required to provide operational or monitoring capabilities as part of the need to release faster to the market. And as part of that, they get more responsibility. And as part of more responsibility, they have, together with more power, they get more responsibility. It means that they need to know what's going on. They need to get alerts if something goes down, and they need to be responsive in case that something requires their attention and solve it. And this is obviously the main reason that all of you joined us today. And the fact that the teams are moving faster, need to release faster to production, require that they will know how to monitor and understand what's going on in the production environment. Now let's talk about the challenges. The first one that is very clear, if we're looking at more traditional operation tools, they were designed for applications that are more like three-tier application. Even if this diagram is a simplified one, it's relatively easy to understand. You can print an architecture map and understand how the application looks like. Where the reality, when we look at the containerized application, Kubernetes applications, there are thousands of components that requires that we need to understand where they are, what's happening there, and it's way more complicated to understand the architecture of the solution. More so, the abstraction layer is another complexity here to understand what happened in each one of the abstraction layer, what's the structure of the abstraction layer, which make it way more complex to understand what should be monitored, what happens where, and where the services are. The second one is the fact that the environment, we going back to the cloud solutions and the nature of Kubernetes, everything is extremely dynamic, which means that if I know where something runs at this moment, unlike the previous diagram that I showed with a three-tier application, I don't know where are my Kubernetes and pods are running right now. They may change at every given moment, which means that we need to be able to understand and build a solution that will know how to handle that complexity. The fact that the solution is temporary, meaning that we'll talk about some of the best practices, but the fact that a pod may be up at this moment, and then we may have additional pods available in the next hour, and then they go down, requires us to understand and take that into account on where we save the data, how we ship the data, and how we handle the pods themselves. And the last one that I want to talk is about the fact that if we work with multiple cloud vendors, how we connect and ship the data, understand what's going on with those containers and Dockers that run on multiple cloud vendors. Obviously, that's another level of complexity that adds to the other challenges that I mentioned earlier, which obviously make the fact and the need to monitor Kubernetes way more complex. So together with the value that Kubernetes provide, and we definitely see that across the board, it brings with it a lot of challenges in regards to how we operate and monitor it. And this is exactly what we see with our customers. I want to talk about 4 best practices that I think, from my perspective, can help and understand, how to start and how to approach Kubernetes monitoring. The first one that I want to talk about is metadata, because the Kubernetes, as we said, that they are dynamic and they are moving and they are temporary. When we ship the metrics, we want to send it with all the metadata that we can, in order that when we look at metric, we can understand exactly from which host it comes, from which container, from which port it comes, what runs, what kind of services it runs, etc. This is something that really help to triage and understand the source of the metrics. The second one is storage. We talked with few customers and few users that I've met that initially stored their metrics locally on the cluster, and obviously because of the fact that things are temporary, that's problematic, and highly recommended to ship all the metrics into a centralized place, either we'll talk about solutions later, but that definitely shouldn't be on the cluster itself. The next one that I want to talk about is the need, when we're looking at, now something happened. The first thing that helps us to understand where we should start is really to identify where the specific service that we're trying to address, or the issue that we see that relate to specific service, how to start to address it. We usually work with kubectl to understand what Kubernetes execute that specific service, and from there we go and triage and understand what's going on there. We'll see an example about Nginx in a few minutes. And the last one, when you evaluate a solution, 2 points that I would like to highlight. The first one is make sure that any solution that you look at can work across multiple cloud vendors. And the second one, that when you're looking at logs, when you look at metrics is only partial picture of what really happens in your pre-production or production environment. And in order to complete the picture, make sure that any solution you choose will know to provide you the complete picture that also include logs, potentially also includes tracing and stuff like this. So that will really help you to understand quickly what's the source of the problem and what you need to do in order to solve the problem. So those are kind of really high-level best practices. We'll talk about what we're planning next, but this is kind of really in a high-level things that we would recommend. I want to take this opportunity and really share with you, if we're looking at solutions, there are multiple solutions out there. There are, multiples and many commercial solutions out there. There are obviously, if we're looking at Kubernetes, Prometheus is a very known and popular open source solution. Grafana as the presentation layer on top of that is popular as well. And I wanted to take this opportunity today and share with you a solution that we are working on that can really connect the dots between the logs and the metrics themselves. And I think this is one of the first opportunities that we had to share this solution in public. If you would be interested to know more about the solution, obviously I'll be happy to share. We'll be able to take it afterwards. So I want to share with you, kind of for those of you who are familiar with Logz.io, when can you see now the Logz.io screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So for those of you who are familiar with Logz.io, You are familiar to this top bar, which has Kibana and the other capabilities. As you can see here, we added another tab, which is a metrics tab. Basically, what happens here is this is a hosted Grafana that runs and present the metrics themselves. We are working in our case with shippers like MetricBit, but this is only for this specific example about our solution. Obviously, other solution available in the market, but in this case, we ship the metrics with MetricBit. Everything is sent and indexed into our Elastic. We found it address some of the scalability issues that Prometheus struggle with, especially when you start to send metrics in scale. This is the Grafana hosted view. We can look at specific, dashboard. In this case, I'm looking at Kubernetes cluster. You can look, one very helpful dashboard can be a one layer on top of it, which is a more high-level view of all your hosts, all your pods, and their status. So that can really help you over time. It can really help you to understand in high level what happens. But let's assume now that we got a trigger, that something, an alert that something happens in our system, and we can look at the specific cluster. You can see over here the number of containers that run. I'm trying to understand what's the root cause of the problem, and I can actually see here that around 5:30 I start to see increase in the pod memory usage going up. I can see that this is the Nginx pod that create that specific problem. I may want to filter that, so I can look at the specific container. I want to filter the Nginx to understand what's going on specifically on the Nginx container. And I can see over here that this is very problematic and disturbing. I can see that I don't have enough available memory. So obviously there is a problem, specific problem on that specific container. What really can help me is to move from here and navigate to the logs themselves. We added a capability that allows you to explore the logs in Kibana from that specific view. And what's happening right now is that we're opening the Kibana, leveraging the same filter. So the context is the same context as the one that we had from the Grafana view. So you can see here that this is the same filter, that I'm looking at the specific pod name, which is Nginx. I'm looking at a specific cluster, and really in the Discover view, I can see also a very interesting view that around 7:15, I see the kind of an interesting behavior that happens around the logs that were shipped. I can see over here the problem. So obviously I can see over here that there are too many open files that were shipped. I can see here the cluster. I can see the host name. I can see the message, obviously, and I can see the pod name. So that can really help me to understand where this come from. I can see the line of code where that created that problem, and from here I would like to go to the code itself, debug and understand what's going on. So that's kind of an interesting flow that connects the dot between the metrics themselves, the issues that you may see in production, and then how we connect the dot. For those of you who are familiar with our insights, I obviously can connect that and see interesting insights that relates to this specific issue. I can see that over here, the IO exception issue. This is a pattern that we see that is more common, that also related to what we saw earlier. So it really completes the picture between the metrics themselves, the Kubernetes metrics that were sent, how we filter them, and how we connect the dots to the logs and the source of the problem. So that's kind of an initial demo of a new capability that we're going to introduce in our product. We're going to announce it towards the end of this year, so more to follow, and we were kind of very excited to share that with you. So that's kind of really in the demo for today. We are planning to have another more deeper dive into the technical aspect of what are the specific things that we would recommend you to monitor, what are the capabilities that we would recommend you guys to look at, and this is definitely something that we're planning to add. So that's at least the main thing that I wanted to cover today, and I want to hand it back to you, Gwen. If we have questions, we can look at them and discuss and answer those questions.
Thanks so much, Roy. So I don't see any questions up right now. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes. Roy, if there's anything you want to elaborate on, feel free. But I think as of now, we're ready to give people a few minutes back of time in their day.
Yeah, so I think one question that came, and I actually see them, we got them
there
over
they are. They're flowing in.
Yeah, prior to the webinar, one of the question was, what's in Kubernetes we deploy Ingress Nginx as a pod, and how we can send the Nginx Kubernetes logs to Logz.io, as every time new Nginx pod created, the name will be changed. So there are a few aspects to that question. I think that one thing that we covered today, that there are new ways that we're exposing that allows users to track and monitor their application using metric beat rather than just the logs. And we know that today we have customers that use the log mechanism in order to monitor their Kubernetes applications. But to the specific question, there are basically three ways that I would recommend to look at. The first one is FluentD to Kubernetes, which basically you can ship all the logs using FluentD. That's going to ship massive number of logs to Logz.io, and you can use that on specific cases when you want to make sure that you get all the logs without the need or the desire to filter them. This is one option. Another option, which is shipping the container using std out and std error, you can ship them with open source. I can send it to you. That will ship. You can define. You can run a container that will track hosts and pods that are going on specific hosts, and you can define if a pod that runs an Nginx as part of it, you can track and basically collect specific logs that this specific pod execute, and you can define what kind of logs you would like to get. And another one that we're using internally is we have for some of the more custom metrics that we're looking at, we have appenders that we developed internally in the application that ship and send the metrics to Logz.io, and this is how we collect some of the custom metrics and expose them internally at Logz.io. So those are kind of three practices, and we can get back to you, the person who asked that question, we can get back to you with all the information and send you links to the open sources that that can help you ship the metrics to us. If you look at the Docker container that runs and collect, the second option that I mentioned earlier, we're now developing the same capability that we have for logs. We developed the same capability also for metrics, so you can define on multiple pods which metrics you're interested in, and those will be shipped to our new metrics solution. I hope it helps and answer the question. Any other questions? I don't see additional questions.
Yeah, I don't see any either, but those were really good. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to answer them. Yeah, but as far as the webinar goes, thank you all so much for attending. And as usual, we'll just keep an eye on our website. We have new webinars almost every single week. Okay, great. Everybody have a good day.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Roy.
much. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.